The cuffs on my wrists buzzed with a current strong enough to make my teeth ache, and 4 guards twice my height pushed me forward across a floor so polished I could see my own tired face looking back at me. There was no time to think about how I got here. There was only the throne ahead, and the creature sitting on it, watching me the way someone watches an insect they have not yet decided to crush. Her name was Vasira, ruler of the Caliph Dominion, and an hour earlier her warship had been mine. Not anymore. Now it was drifting wreckage, and I was the last piece of my team standing in a palace, built from a metal that glowed faintly blue under its own light. She rose from her throne without hurry. Her 6 eyes moved over me slowly, one at a time, as if she wanted to be sure she was seeing correctly. Behind her, banners hung from the ceiling, each one marking a species her empire had folded into silence. I did not want to know how many banners there were. I already knew there were too many. "You are the one," she said, her voice flat and cold through the translator built into my collar, "who took my ship." "Alone." "Not alone," I said. "There were 12 of us." "12," she repeated, and something in her tone made it sound like an insult aimed at herself. "Against 300 trained soldiers, and yet here you stand, and my ship is gone." I did not answer right away. My ribs hurt with every breath. My left arm was numb from the cuffs. And somewhere behind those closed doors, the rest of the fleet was deciding whether to bomb this palace from orbit or wait for a signal that might never come. I had maybe minutes before one of those guards decided I was more trouble than I was worth. Vasira stepped down from the dais, her claws clicking softly against the floor with each step, until she stood close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet her eyes. "Tell me something, small creature," she said. "How many battles have you fought in your short, fragile life?" I felt the question land somewhere deep, somewhere older than the mission, older than the war with her people. It was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer, even if the honest answer was strange. "None," I said. One of her eyes twitched. "Explain yourself." "We do not call them battles while they are happening," I said. "We only call them that afterward, once we know who is left standing. Before that, we just call it another day." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence should. A guard near the door shifted his weight, and I heard the soft grind of a weapon being adjusted. Ready, but not yet raised. Vasira tilted her head, studying me, the way a scientist studies something that refuses to behave the way the textbook says it should. "You mock me." "I am not mocking you," I said. "I am answering your question. You want a number. I do not have one, because counting stopped mattering a long time ago." "Then give me something that matters," she said, and for the first time, there was an edge of impatience under the coldness. "Tell me how 12 of your kind destroyed 300 of mine." I thought about where to begin. There were 100 ways to start that story, and all of them were true. "My team was not chosen because we were the strongest," I said. "We were chosen because we were the ones still standing, after everything else had already tried to break us and failed. That is how it works with my kind. We do not train soldiers from nothing. We take people who have already survived something, and we teach them how to turn that surviving into something useful." "Survived what?" she asked. "Everything," I said. "One of my team grew up during a drought that lasted 6 years, in a place where water was rationed by the cup. Another lost half her family to a sickness we did not have a cure for until she was almost grown. I grew up in a city that was rebuilt 3 times before I turned 18, because storms kept tearing it down, and each time we rebuilt it stronger than before. None of that shows up on a service record. None of that gets written into a mission file. But it is the reason we did not break when your soldiers expected us to." Vasira's tail moved slowly behind her. A small motion that I was starting to understand meant she was thinking harder than she wanted to show. "Your soldiers were well trained," I continued. "I will give them that much respect. They moved in formation. They covered every angle. They followed a doctrine that had probably worked 100 times before against 100 other species. But doctrine assumes the enemy will react the way the manual says they should. My team does not react the way manuals expect, because none of us learned how to survive from a manual. We learned it from life." "You speak as though survival is a weapon," she said. "It is the only weapon that matters," I said. "Weapons run out of power. Ships run out of fuel. Armies run out of soldiers. But a person who has already survived the worst thing that could happen to them does not run out of reasons to keep going. That is what your intelligence reports never manage to capture about my species. You measure us by our ships and our numbers, and by those measurements, we should have lost this war a long time ago. But you never measured the thing that actually keeps us standing. She was quiet for a long moment, and I used it to keep breathing steadily, keep my voice calm, because panic would only give the guards a reason to move. "Tell me about the ship," she said finally. "Tell me how you took it." I nodded slowly. "We came in through a maintenance corridor your engineers built for repairs, the kind of narrow space no one expects a boarding party to use, because it was never designed for combat. We lost Daniel Frost at the outer hatch, right at the start, when the door sealed faster than we planned, and a patrol found him before the rest of us could pull him back. He bought us 4 minutes with his life. 4 minutes does not sound like much, but it was enough for the rest of us to reach the reactor deck before the alarm spread through the whole ship." "You speak of his death very calmly," Basira said, and there was something almost curious in the way she said it, like she expected grief to look different on my face. "I am not calm," I said. "I simply learned a long time ago that grief and focus have to share the same body sometimes, because there is no time to choose only one. I will grieve for him properly later, when this is over, in whatever way is left of me to grieve. Right now, I am still trying to make sure his death meant something." She studied me again, and for a moment her contempt faded into something closer to genuine confusion, the look of someone encountering a pattern they had never seen before and did not know how to categorize. "Continue," she said. "From the reactor deck, we split into 2 groups," I said. "Grace Bennett led one team toward the command level, while Ethan Cole and I moved with Lucy Hartman toward the power core. Your soldiers expected us to move together, to stay in a tight formation the way trained units usually do. We did the opposite. We spread out, because a scattered target is harder to predict, and because each of us had already learned how to survive alone if it came to that." "And did it come to that?" she asked. "For a while," I said. "Lucy was cut off from us for almost 10 minutes, trapped in a corridor with 3 of your soldiers between her and the rest of the team. She did not panic. She used the ventilation system to move above them instead of through them, and she rejoined us before we reached the core. That is the thing your training manuals cannot teach. Improvisation under pressure is not something you drill into someone. It is something that gets built into a person over years of small emergencies that never make it into any official record." Basira's claws tapped once against the floor, a sharp sound in the silence. "When we reached the core," I continued, "Grace's team had already secured the command level, though not without cost. We lost contact with one of hers for almost a minute, long enough that we thought we had lost him too, until his voice came back over the comm, breathing hard but alive. He had been forced to hide inside a supply locker while a patrol passed, and he waited there in complete silence for longer than most people could manage without breaking. That is not bravery in the way your stories probably describe bravery. It is something quieter. It is the ability to stay still and trust that staying still is the smarter choice, even when every instinct screams at you to move. You make it sound almost peaceful," she said, and there was something sharp underneath the words now. Something that sounded like she was trying to find the flaw in my story before it convinced her of something she did not want to believe. "None of it was peaceful," I said. "It was loud, and it was frightening, and every single one of us thought more than once that we were not going to make it back. But fear and function are not opposites. We learned a long time ago how to let fear ride along without letting it drive. Your soldiers, from what I saw, were trained to eliminate fear entirely, to treat it as a weakness to be trained out of them. That works well until something happens that the training never predicted. Then fear comes rushing back all at once, and a soldier who has never learned how to work alongside it does not know what to do with it." "And you do," she said, not quite a question. "We have had a lot of practice," I said. "That is the honest answer. My species has spent its whole history learning how to keep moving forward, even when everything around us insists that we should not be able to. We have survived diseases that once seemed unstoppable. We have rebuilt cities after disasters that erased them completely. We have fought each other in wars that should have ended us, and instead, we came out the other side and kept building. None of that makes us stronger than you. in the way your ships are stronger than ours. But it means we do not stop simply because the numbers say we should. By now, 2 of the guards had lowered their weapons slightly, not out of mercy, but because they seemed to be listening despite themselves, caught up in something they had not expected to feel in this room. When we finally reached the core, I said, there were more soldiers waiting for us than we planned for. Your officers had figured out where we were headed and moved to intercept. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. I thought we had come so far only to be stopped one room short of finishing what we started. What changed? Vasira asked, and for the first time, her voice had lost its edge entirely, replaced by something that sounded almost like genuine interest. Ethan, I said. He noticed something none of us had considered, that the coolant lines feeding the core ran directly beneath the floor we were standing on, close enough to the surface that a controlled overload would force an emergency shutdown without destroying the ship outright. It was not part of any plan. It was something he figured out in the space of maybe 10 seconds, standing in a room full of soldiers with weapons raised, because his mind never stopped working, even when everything around him said it should have frozen. He gambled the ship and his life on an idea formed in 10 seconds, Vasira said slowly, as if she were turning the concept over and finding it strange in a way she had no word for. He did, I said. And it worked. The shutdown forced your soldiers to evacuate the deck before the coolant pressure became dangerous, which gave us the window we needed to secure the core completely. We did not destroy your ship out of anger or cruelty. We disabled it because that was the mission, and because every one of us wanted to walk away from that room alive, including the soldiers who were trying to stop us. I want you to understand that. We were not there for revenge. We were there because your fleet had already crossed a border that was never yours to cross, and someone had to answer for that without turning it into something worse than it needed to be. Vasira's gaze sharpened again, but the coldness in it had changed shape, no longer contempt, but something closer to unease. You say this as though restraint is easy for your kind, she said. It is not easy, I said. It is chosen. There is a difference. My species has learned, sometimes the hard way, that winning a fight and winning a future are not always the same thing. If we had destroyed your ship completely, more of your soldiers would have died, and more of ours would have paid the price for a rescue that did not need to happen. Choosing to disable instead of destroy took more discipline than pulling a trigger ever would have. That discipline is not something you can measure from orbit. It does not show up in any report your scouts could have sent you before this meeting. The Queen's tail had gone completely still now, and one of the guards behind her shifted his stance in a way that looked almost nervous, though I doubted a creature like that would ever admit to nerves out loud. So when you ask me how many battles I have fought, I said, the truth is that I stopped counting a long time ago, because counting battles assumes there is a clear beginning and a clear end to each one. For my species, there is not. There is only the next challenge, and the one after that, stretching back farther than anyone alive can remember, and probably stretching forward the same way. We are not exceptional because we win every fight. We lose plenty of them. We are exceptional because losing has never once been enough to make us stop. Vasira turned away from me for the first time since the conversation began, walking slowly back toward her throne, though she did not sit. She stood with one hand resting against the armrest, staring at nothing in particular, and I watched something shift behind her eyes that looked almost like doubt. I have crushed rebellions, she said quietly, more to herself than to me. I have watched entire fleets kneel before mine, without a single shot fired, simply because they understood the numbers and knew resistance was pointless. That is the difference between us, I said. You have spent your rule teaching everyone around you that resistance is pointless. My species has spent its entire history proving the opposite, over and over, in every form that lesson can take. You cannot frighten a species that has already survived worse than anything you can threaten it with. I do not say that to boast. I say it because it is simply true, and because I think somewhere underneath all of this, you already suspect it is true as well. She turned back to face me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The guards stood frozen, unsure whether to wait for an order or to act on their own, and I stood there with cuffs still humming against my wrists, waiting to find out whether honesty had been the right choice or the last mistake I would ever make. Release him, Vasira said finally. One of the guards hesitated, his weapon still half raised. Your Majesty, he destroyed. I said release him, she repeated, sharper now, though the sharpness was not aimed at me. And recall every ship stationed along the human border, all of them, immediately. The cuffs fell away from my wrists a moment later, and the sudden absence of that current felt almost strange after so long. I rubbed the skin beneath where they had been, watching Vasira carefully, waiting to see if this was mercy or simply a different kind of trap. You are letting me go, I said. I am choosing not to waste more of my fleet on a species that does not know how to stay defeated, she said, and there was no anger left in her voice, only something quiet and tired that I recognized because I had felt it myself, more than once, after a fight that cost more than it should have. Go back to your people. Tell them the Caliph Dominion will not cross this border again. I nodded slowly, still cautious, still half expecting the guards to move despite her order. They did not. They simply stepped aside, clearing a path toward the doors at the far end of the hall. Before I walked away, I turned back to her one last time. Can I ask you something? You may, she said. Why change your mind because of one conversation? She considered the question longer than I expected. Because for the first time in a very long rule, I met someone who did not need my permission to keep standing, she said. That is not a fight I can win with soldiers, no matter how many I send. I did not have an answer for that, so I did not try to give one. I simply turned and walked toward the doors, past guards who watched me go without moving to stop me, out into a corridor that led back toward the docking bay, where whatever remained of my ride home was waiting. Somewhere behind me, the throne room fell silent again, and I let myself breathe for the first time since the cuffs had gone on. Ahead of me was a long journey home, a debrief that would ask questions I was not sure I had good answers for, and a quiet moment I owed to Daniel Frost, whose name deserved to be remembered properly once there was finally time to remember it. But for now, there was only the walk forward, one step after another, the same way it had always been, the same way it would keep being for as long as it needed to. The docking bay was quieter than I expected when I finally reached it, the kind of quiet that comes after something enormous has already happened, and no one is quite sure what to say about it yet. A small transport waited near the far wall, its engines already humming, and I recognized the pilot standing beside it, as one of the crew who had helped plan the extraction days earlier, back when this mission was still only a set of coordinates and a list of risks nobody wanted to say out loud. She did not ask me what happened inside the palace. She simply looked at my face, saw whatever was written there, and stepped aside to let me board first. I appreciated that more than I could have explained at the time. Some questions deserve to wait until a person has had a chance to sit down and breathe before answering them. I found a seat near the back of the transport, and let my head rest against the cold metal wall as the engines rose in pitch beneath me. Through the small viewport, I watched Vasira's palace shrink behind us, its blue light fading into the darkness of the docking bay until it disappeared entirely. Somewhere above the planet, ships that had been prepared for a battle none of us wanted were already receiving orders to turn away instead, and I found myself wondering how many of those soldiers would go home tonight without ever understanding why the fight had ended before it truly began. I thought about Daniel Frost for a long time during that flight, replaying the 4 minutes he had bought us at the outer hatch, turning them over in my mind, the way you turn over something fragile you are afraid of dropping. He would not get a parade. Most of what happened today would stay classified for years, filed away under a mission number instead of a name people could remember. But somewhere in a quiet room, months from now, someone would read that file and understand exactly what those 4 minutes had cost, and what they had bought in return. Grace found me partway through the flight, dropping into the seat across from mine without a word, her uniform still marked with the dust of the reactor deck. She did not ask how the meeting with the Queen had gone. She simply waited, the way she always did, patient enough to let silence do the talking, until I was ready to fill it myself. She pulled the fleet back, I said finally. All of it. Grace exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders in a way I had not noticed until it was gone. Because of what you told her? Because of what all of us did, I said. I just happened to be the one standing in front of her when it mattered. She nodded, understanding that better than most people could have, because she had been there too, in the corridors and the reactor deck, and every quiet moment of fear that never made it into any official report. We sat together in silence for a while after that, two people who had survived something neither of us fully understood yet, watching the stars shift slowly outside the viewport as the transport carried us home. By the time we docked, word of the fleet's withdrawal had already reached the rest of the crew, spreading through the ship in the particular hush that follows news too large to shout about right away. There would be debriefings later, and questions from officers who wanted a tactical explanation for something that had never really been about tactics at all. I would answer those questions as honestly as I could, though I doubted any report could capture the moment a queen who had crushed a dozen rebellions chose, for the first time in her long rule, to simply walk away. What stayed with me longest was not the throne room, or the cuffs, or even the look on Visera's face when she finally understood what she was dealing with. It was the quiet certainty I had felt standing there, answering her question honestly, instead of trying to impress her with a number that meant nothing. Somewhere along the way, without ever deciding to, I had stopped measuring my life in battles, and started measuring it in the simple fact that I was still here to keep going, and that had turned out to be the only answer strong enough to end a war before it truly started. That was the only answer that had ever mattered.